In our last video, we saw Hitler stand at the height of his power, having conquered Europe and launched the most devastating ideological war in history. But in June 1941, he made the fatal strategic error that would ensure his defeat: the invasion of the Soviet Union. The sheer scale of the Eastern Front, coupled with the brutal Russian winter, broke the momentum of the Wehrmacht. The tide was turning. This is the story of the collapse, the turning points of the war, the inner resistance, and the final desperate hours in the bunker that led to the death of the Führer and the total defeat of the Third Reich. For many historians, the true end of Hitler's aggressive war began in the bitter ruins of Stalingrad. From August 1942 to February 1943, the German Sixth Army was encircled and systematically destroyed by the Soviet forces. The defeat at Stalingrad was not just a military disaster, it was a psychological one. It was the first time that the German public was openly informed about a total loss of an entire army. The myth of the invincible Wehrmacht was shattered. Meanwhile, the Allies were advancing in North Africa and Italy. Britain and the United States intensified their strategic bombing campaigns against German industrial centers and cities, aiming to break the morale of the civilian population. Germany was now fighting a brutal two-front war. The increasing realization that Hitler was leading Germany to total ruin gave rise to organized internal resistance among conservatives and the military elite. They believed the only way to save Germany from annihilation was to eliminate Hitler. The most famous attempt was the July 20th plot in 1944. Led by Colonel Klaus Schenk Graf von Stauffenberg, the plan was to assassinate Hitler with a bomb during a meeting at the Wolfslayer headquarters in East Prussia, seize control of the government, and negotiate peace with the Western Allies. The bomb exploded, but Hitler was only lightly wounded. The plot failed disastrously. The coup attempt, known as Operation Valkyrie, collapsed within hours. Hitler's revenge was swift and merciless. Thousands of suspected conspirators and their family members were rounded up, tortured, and executed in highly publicized show trials. The failed plot served only to solidify Hitler's paranoia and his absolute, unshakable control over the military and the state in the final year of the war. While the Eastern Front consumed the majority of German forces, the Western Allies prepared for the decisive blow. On June 6, 1944, American, British, and Canadian forces successfully landed on the beaches of Normandy in France. D-Day established a permanent Western Front and accelerated the inevitable defeat. By the end of 1944, the Soviet Red Army was pouring into Eastern Europe, while the Western Allies had liberated France and were advancing toward the German border. Hitler, delusional and cut off from reality, continued to issue orders for counterattacks that no longer had a military basis. Germany was mobilizing its last reserves, the Volkssturm, made up of boys and elderly men. Cities like Berlin were reduced to rubble by Allied bombs. Despite the obvious hopelessness, Hitler demanded a fight to the bitter end, sacrificing countless civilians and soldiers in a desperate act of nihilism. By April 1945, the Soviet army had surrounded Berlin. Hitler retreated permanently into the Führerbunker, a network of concrete rooms deep beneath the shattered capital. Cut off from his generals and fueled by drug injections and delusion, he spent his final days giving fantastical orders to armies that no longer existed. Reality was filtering through. He learned that his most trusted leaders, like Heinrich Himmler, were attempting to negotiate peace behind his back. In a final act of private ceremony, he married his longtime mistress, Eva Braun. On April 30th, 1945, with the Soviet troops just blocks away, Adolf Hitler committed suicide by gunshot in his private study. Eva Braun ended her life alongside him by taking cyanide. Their bodies were hastily carried out, doused in petrol, and burned by remaining staff, according to Hitler's final instructions. With his death, the core of the Nazi regime was gone. The war in Europe finally ended a week later with Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, 1945. The final price of Hitler's ambition was paid by Europe and the world. Over 70 million deaths globally, the industrial murder of 6 million Jews, and the total moral and physical ruin of Germany. The story of Hitler is the ultimate cautionary tale. It shows how the lethal cocktail of crisis, trauma, and calculated propaganda can elevate an obscure, hateful man to absolute power. It shows how the failure of political elites, the apathy of the public, and the willingness to turn a blind eye can destroy a democracy in mere months. The task of remembering and understanding this darkest chapter remains, because the seeds of hate and division that nurtured Hitler's rise can tragically be found in every generation.